Well, hey there, John. Thanks so much for joining me today.
It's a privilege. Thanks for asking. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. How's the weather in Saskatoon today?
It's plus 30, and we're just all and absolutely brutal actually. It was minus 30 with the wind chill overnight, so it's winter. Yeah,
Yeah, it has returned to the prairies.
it's
Uh,
Canada over it, right?
that's exactly it. Let's talk about what we're really here to really discuss today.
Yeah.
One of the things I've heard you speak about, and I know it's a concept that's really close to what you're about, is this idea of teachers leading teachers and teachers leading learning. Why do you think that that is such an important piece of the teacher profession? Why do you think that it's important to our education system?
I think primarily, I think that we've been leaving it to chance a lot of it. Like I think teachers are pretty guilty at looking elsewhere to have people solve our problems or address our needs, and I think primarily that's what I discovered, in the middle of my career, and when I got into, teacher politics, for lack of a better term, it took me very little time to figure out that talking about student learning was something that never happened in these jobs. So I look after about 4,000 teachers, and it struck me a few months into my job that we hadn't talked about student learning for 3 months, and so at that point, it was something that was pretty clear to me that we need to address. And frankly, I've been inspired by a bunch of teachers that have done it.
Yeah. Now, when you're talking about, speaking about student learning and things like that, I mean, you are the head of an organization, not a local organization that is an
Yeah.
association, as
Yeah.
opposed to strictly a union. And what does that idea of being an association as opposed to strictly a union leader mean? Does that tie into what you're talking about,
Yeah,
or?
it definitely does. I think to meet the practical needs of teachers, things like class size and competition, composition, salary, benefits, all those things that unions do in quotation marks, you're much better off to address the actual work. I think if you look at other professional associations like lawyers or doctors or accountants and things like that, when they're in the public purview, they're talking about their work. They're not talking about what they want. And I got in this business of teaching to help kids, and I think that all the way through the structure, in scope, out of scope, professional association, whatever it is, we're better served if we're talking about student learning, because that's what we're here for.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. What does that mean to you then when you hear people who are advocating or making arguments for taking administrators or school leaders outside of the association, as they've done in many provinces and I'm sure many states? I'm not so up to date, but if we look for me, our colleagues over in BC, what would that mean when you're taking teacher leaders, administrators out of an association? Do you think that would have an impact?
I think it would be devastating. I'll be honest with you. I think that that's the bedrock of what makes our association strong, is that its principals, vice principals, and teachers, from the beginning, their first day of teaching to the end of their last day of teaching. I really believe that principals are not anybody's boss. They're colleagues with a different responsibility, more responsibility in school, and really, like, what I've experienced here is that our principals, from the youngest to the most senior, are leaders of learning primarily. They're not managers, and I think the legislation is clear on that, and I think it would shake the bedrock of our publicly funded system here in Saskatchewan, anyways, if you're taking principals out of scope.
Yeah. What kind of things do you think would shake up? What kind of, I'm asking you to maybe look in the old crystal ball a little bit, but if you were to say, what are the first things do you think tangibly that would go if leaders, school administrators were to be in a different association?
Well, man, I think the easiest answer to that is probably relationships. Um, uh, the relationship between, I think in education, the most important relationship is between a teacher and a student, but followed closely second to that is, collegial relationships, and really right up to my involvement with ministers and deputy ministers and and researchers. It's all about one-to-one relationships, and I think that would be the first thing that would get shaken,
Mm-hmm.
because you'd be managing people's responsibilities instead of sharing their responsibilities. And I think that'll be the first thing that go. Probably the next logical thing would be you'd start to you could create a culture where the ambition of the principal could hurt the ambition of the teacher.
Right. Can you think of explain to me that one, because I'm sure that, I can think of a few, but what are you kind of thinking
I think
about? I mean,
it's
hypothetically, of course.
hypothetically. I mean, I think that the the concept of corporatizing schools would be would be ingrained if you took principals out of scope.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a natural fit for people to step on each other as they climb the ladder to make more money, and I think that would be a likely outcome, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that is tied to this idea of teachers, and leading learning is your involvement with learning sprints. And you've been involved pretty much since learning sprints have been around.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that really spoke to you about this idea of learning sprints, these short inquiry cycles? And what do you think that it does and gives when you're talking about teachers leading learning?
Well, I mean, my first initial glance at learning sprints was when Passy Sahlberg, who everybody knows, introduced me to Simon.
Right.
And one thing that Sahlberg doesn't do is dabble in the mediocrity. And so when he introduced me to Simon, I knew that this was something serious. So it came with a bunch of credibility, anyways, from the get-go. And I think what I see Passy able to do at a system level is what Simon is doing at a school level. Like he understands how to motivate, how to lead via research, put the kids first. And I think his background in psychology is probably the most interesting thing to me. Mm-hmm. Is that it's sort of beyond learning it per se. It's more it's a human approach, and his connection with the IT and and the technology sector, I think, is what intrigued me most. And I think that that's why he's having an effect across, whatever you're doing in the teaching profession. Mm-hmm. It's attractive because it's about good teaching, period.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah,
I could run on it forever, because I shifting high school teachers' practice is very difficult, and I am one, so I know that I'm not trying to judge, but seeing senior teachers that are in my age or older, opening their eyes to some of these techniques or adaptations or innovations that you see in sprints is inspirational, man. Yeah.
So and that was going to be my question. You've been working with this. What are some of the results that you're seeing out in Saskatoon? What do you think, positive outcomes? Do you have maybe a personal connection or a story that you think kind of shows that this has had impact?
I've had tons of personal. Probably the most logical one is my wife's an elementary school principal, and she dove in. She likes to read, and she's voracious about honing her craft as a leader, and when she started using sprints in a very intentional way with her staff, she was inspired, her morale was boosted, and I think probably the biggest thing that I noticed was morale. I think I meant that may be a broad generalization, but it brought teams together, it brought improvement together. It brought that spark, that light bulb going over everybody's head, from directors of education to first-year teachers. And I think that morale piece was really personal to me, because I've got some folks that I really look up to, in all around the system, and the boost of morale and throwing their shoulders back and digging into the work was, it was, put it this way, I'm glad Sahlberg mentioned his name, and I'm glad we got it in the front end, frankly, because we might have missed out on some opportunities otherwise.
Yeah, teaching's hard, hey. So when you can get those things, when you can get those things that make it a little bit easier and people feeling good about the impact they're having, that's amazing.
Yeah, my wife's super inspired by it. Like, and and the spread of people talking about it, and just this natural sort of virus thing has just overtaken our city. I would say 80% of our principals are at least dabbling with at least one sprint per term now, and some are headlong into it. And we, at all levels along the way, it's a topic. Our board has discussions about this work, at the board level. That's incredible. They're talking about student learning. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Let's talk about your trip to Ottawa. You just got back and you were talking about a citizenship program that you've been working on. Can you tell me a little bit about the program, what it looks like, what you're hoping to achieve?
I would love to. Yeah, I think it's what I'm most passionate about. Ultimately, what the program is addressing a need that we found in the classroom here. Saskatoon schools are 50% either new Canadian or non-Canadian, and most of the people that are in the profession are like me, white and middle class, and our classroom shifted so quickly that we had this demographic shift that everybody just was shocked by. And it comes down to one thing, I think, is if you teach a kid to read, they learn to read. If you teach a kid to do math, they learn to do math. Who's teaching kids what it means to be a Canadian? That greatest asset that we have, that fortune that we have of being Canadian, who's teaching them specifically about that? Not the civics of it, not the mechanics of it, what it means to be a Canadian. And that's the root of the work. And so what we've done over the last 8 years is we have developed essentially resources that interlock with the current curriculum here in Saskatchewan. So we're not asking teachers to do more. It's actually asking them to do what's relevant in their classroom, what's contextualized in their classroom. And it is an absolute beautiful thing. It's not values education at all. It's based on the Charter of Rights, and really back to the UN Charter, which I think Canada is probably the closest nation to achieving what's actually in that charter. And so citizenship education, according to Andy Hargreaves, Patsy Sahlberg, Dennis Shirley, those big brains, is going to be a parallel track to numeracy and literacy in the 21st century. So numeracy and literacy will always be the bread and butter of education, as they should be. But those gigantic brains have told us that this would be the third wave, the third pathway in teaching kids what matters. So it's super exciting, and we got it operating about 300 classrooms now in Saskatoon, and probably more than that we just don't know are using it. And the beautiful thing is it's evergreens. Like, we've given it's all developed by teachers for teachers. It was born out of a Human Rights Commission, not out of a Ministry of Education, which is unique globally. So the resources weren't developed through any ministry format. We received funds from the Justice Ministry and from the Ministry of Education, but it was actually all the work was done through a Human Rights Commission, which is essentially does one thing: make sure that everybody is treated fairly, no exceptions. And the resources that have been developed are being evergreened every day in the classroom. So it's actually curriculum that is developing as it's being used. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I'm really passionate about it. It's had a great benefit in our schools here, and the appetite from teachers has been something we actually can't keep up with. Wow. And that's why we went to Ottawa, because we need some help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the questions that someone might have is the idea of Canadian citizenship, whether that be the idea of what is Canadian, no matter what country, can be up for debate. Now, it sounds like you leaned heavily on the Charter of Human Rights. So we have the Canadian Charter of Human Rights, but is that the only part of that answer that you would say to someone? Who are you to say what is Canadian or what are our values?
Well, it's not up to me to say that. It's up to the Charter. It's law. The way that we sort of would pitch it is it's the new 3 R's: rights, respect, and responsibility. You need to know your rights, so you don't knowingly transgress the rights of others. There is no rights without a corollary responsibility. The way that we look at it, this is a big moment for education. The rights revolution was born out of the post Second World War, Cold War era. And the rights revolution was born in courtrooms. So judges and lawyers fought the good fight to bring fairness, more fairness to our society. We're calling this a responsibility revolution, where my responsibility as a Canadian is always got to be looked through the lens of making the world a better place. Because we're Canadians, we owe it to the world to make it a better place. That being said, that's a pretty high responsibility. And we think that this revolution won't be born in courtrooms, they'll be born in classrooms. So teachers will lead this revolution, this responsibility revolution. And we're finding that we don't have to teach the new Canadians very much about that, because that's why they came here.
Yeah.
Ones like you and I that are being privileged to be from Canada and born and raised in Canada are the ones that need reminded of it. Yeah, it's fragile. I think what you see, around the world in countries like Hungary and Brazil and the United States, obviously, is that it's a product of not dealing with the citizenship piece very much. Yeah,
that's an excellent point. In fact, I was thinking the same thing. I think we're seeing a whole bunch of examples right now of countries who aren't sure what it means to treat everyone fairly, and we're going to have more and more, I think, disruption of what the norms are. So as we increase immigration, or we have waves of migration as they do in Europe, or anything like that, that's when you find out whether people are going to uphold those basic rights, those basic values, those basic, what you would say, laws and responsibilities that underpin society and the good functioning of our society.
Yeah, and like we try to look at that it looks at the big social context issues, right? Like, probably, in a nutshell, it's an antidote to hate. We think that we're providing an inoculant to hate. Hate is born of ignorance, and love is born of knowledge. And so the way that the way the resources really work is when issues like a Pittsburgh synagogue or an LA nightclub or these Colton Boushie, which is a big thing in Saskatchewan, right?
Yeah.
When those issues arise, how do you react to those as teachers, right? And you have to have reliable places that you can go, resources that you can go to, not just Google it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the biggest thing that teachers have said to me, is that we can go to those resources and we can actually react to immediate situations with stable, and we're backed up with, it feels like they've got steel in their back to address these issues that kids are coming in with at a very young age to ask questions about, as well they damn well should, Yeah.
No, I totally agree. That's very exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing some of that stuff, and wish you nothing but the best.
We lead the country in racism, okay, which isn't a badge of honor, let's just say. So, yeah, we went through a boom of immigration, and we still haven't burst the bubble of racism towards First Nations people in this province. And so we think the need and the appetite is high in the classrooms for it. And we think if we can address it in Saskatchewan and have some success with it, it's something the rest of the country can learn from. And that's what we discovered in Ottawa, was that there was an appetite across the country and this sort of shock that nobody else is dealing with it. Nobody's doing it.
Yeah. When you think about education, is there something that you believe is true that other people, maybe most other people, would disagree with you on?
Wow, I can be controversial. That's a dangerous thing. I actually think probably the one thing that I would take the most as a representative of teachers is there's probably a percentage that shouldn't be anywhere near kids. There's probably a percentage of teachers that got in it and can't get out.
Right.
And, that's maybe a silly thing for me to say as a representative of teachers, but that would be probably the one thing that I see, is that you can tell there's people, if given an option, they might opt out, but making decent money, the benefits are good, mortgages to pay, all that sort of stuff. I think part of the weakness of unions or teachers associations across the country, maybe around the world, is keeping the incompetent in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
That's a good one. Any brainwaves about how we might address that?
The one that always comes back to me is like a workman's comp issue. So if I was a welder, let's just say, and I could no longer weld, workman's comp would retrain me to do something else, to get me back into the workforce, maybe in a different area that surrounded welding or something completely different. Right. If we could have some sort of model like where a teacher could recognize that I'm not a teacher anymore, and a graceful off ramp out of the profession, maybe a 2 or 3 year cycle to go re-educate. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a bus driver. I'm not a teacher.
Yeah.
When they have that reality, because I know that because people have spoken to me about that on a regular basis, is if you could have a graceful off ramp out of the profession into a different one, I think that would be something that would be money well spent.
I keep thinking about the inverse is true as well. I think that there are some people out there who would be wonderful teachers who are perhaps not in our profession and who have skills that would be very interesting, especially in high schools. And to have perhaps a graceful in-ramp as well as off-ramp, or on-ramp as well as off-ramp, that would be
that's less controversial.
That is less controversial, isn't it? Hey,
and it's funny when you say that, because my dad was a doctor, and most of my families are like first cousins, etc., are doctors, and the part of the job they love the most is teaching, teaching people to be doctors, and like the real joy is sharing their knowledge with other colleagues, not necessarily the practice of medicine. Yeah. And always that intrigues me. It's that joy that you get when somebody learns something that you've intended them to learn. That's gold.
Yeah.
Right?
I totally agree. When you think of the term master teacher, who or what comes to mind?
Well, that question, it's just certain people's faces come to my mind. I don't know if I can define it at all. I've seen it in action. Like I've seen people that have taught me. Obviously, I think everybody's in this business. There's somebody that comes to mind. One is Dawn McLean. She was my band teacher in elementary school, and she was the consummate professional, and she was kind. She was always willing to let you screw up, and she was comfortable with letting you loose to make mistakes and then helping you get up instead of stomping on you when you fell. Master teacher is a relationship builder. Love, to me. Yeah. Love, that's it. With almost no bounds to it. Like, they talk about unconditional love. I think that's master teacher. Yeah. And and right now, like, I get the privilege of being in 109 schools, in 1 or 2 schools a day, and you just see it on the playground. You see it you just see it all over the place. And in my job, what I've seen is like superintendents, directors of education, trustees, board chairs that are master teachers too. Because my classroom, in my job as president of an association, my classroom is the minister, the deputy minister, and my trustees. Like, I have a classroom too. It's just not made up of children. And so what I've seen is people that are great directors. They know who their classroom is and how to use sprints to get to make some improvements for kids.
That's a great point. All the teachers are not necessarily teaching kids and in classrooms. That's a good one.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have a favorite failure or a favorite success that you felt really informed forward your work? Something that kind of happened, good or bad, that you kind of look back and say, hey, that taught me a really important lesson?
Unfortunately, yeah, I do. I told a joke at our convention about 3 or 4 years ago that was a little bit offside, not much offside. But I learned about the teacher politics, and the politics of education. I told a joke, and I was charged with professional misconduct. And it went through a couple, and it was a joke, but it caused me to look at the language I use, obviously, where I also became aware that when you're in positions of authority like this, people will like to shoot bullets at you, and that's part of the game. And what I learned from going through that, I was cleared of it, dismissed and all that sort of stuff. But it was 2 years of absolute hell, lawyers and accusations, and it was a nightmare. And it was just all politics. It had nothing to do with misconduct or professionalism, neither of those things. So what I learned is you have to have a thick skin in leadership, and be open to criticism, but also be open to the fact that sometimes the criticism is unreasonable, and the criticism isn't necessarily there to improve the system or to improve your work. It can be just petty.
Yeah. Any tips on, so, we're school leaders. I think many people out there, do you have any tips on recognizing that? Now, obviously, if you get, charged with misconduct, that's a pretty obvious for something you don't believe. But
Yeah.
have you developed this criteria of, hey, I can forget about that. That's just a petty type thing. Or no, this is actually good feedback that I don't want to hear. So I might be inclined to think it's petty, but in fact, I should listen to it, and I should maybe check myself and evaluate.
Well, that's I learned that. I would say that I learned that, what I'm going to say, from Adrian Pickley, who was here for a week, and he's running the Skonsky Institute, former Minister of Education in New South Wales, and probably the most effective politician in education circles globally. And he just said, in the best interest of children, that's the filter. That's the filter. In the best interest. So sometimes it might be 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 20 steps removed. But if you know that you're taking that leap or listening to that conversation and it's in the best interest of the child, you're doing the right thing. That's my filter.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah. And it could be a few rungs before you get to the best interest of the child. But if you can see that is if that's your North Star, I think you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple quicker questions. Do you have any a favorite app or a website or maybe even some other media that you often direct teachers, people to?
I actually probably I'm a bit of a Twitter addict, and that's not necessarily. I actually think that like the engagement of teachers on Twitter is really quite professional, as opposed to in other circles, like in political circles or in sports circles, where it just goes off the rails. I think Twitter is a fantastic tool for professional learning. I do. So that's a real blanket sort of common one, but I'm a bit of an addict on that one. So yeah, and I love watching the interactions and the way it sort of spreads. You see somebody that you really admire likes something, you go and follow them and you learn more. It's sort of like a snowball effect. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be my yeah.
Hey, while we're on the subject, can people access the citizenship resources that you were talking about earlier? Is there a website there?
Of course, yeah. Everything's there and completely shareable.
Yeah.
And it's just consentus.ca, like CONT, consentus.ca. Sorry, CONCENTUS. Consentus, not consensus, but consentus, which means essentially consensus in Latin.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Do you have a book that you quote or refer to? You again, do you maybe give to people?
I'm wildly ADHD, and I'll be honest with you, I'm guilty of not reading very much.
Yeah.
I'm really guilty of that. My wife hates me saying this publicly, but I'm a news junkie, and I'm a in short spurts junkie.
Yeah.
So what I'm lately sharing with people is things like podcasts.
Yeah.
Things that you can do when they're doing something else. If they have a brain that's the mind that is really hard to focus. I can't sit and read.
Yeah.
I just can't do that. So I tend to share either podcasts or little spurts of, like the TED Talk factor is still maybe a little bit archaic, but there's usually things that I like there that are quick hitters,
Interesting. I've had that exact same conversation with 2 different people today. They just can't tear into, not only because of attention issues, but workload and family and all these kind of things. So they said exactly the same thing, shorter snippets, podcasts.
I give people, I need people like my wife that do have the attention span to read and then highlight things for me and then have a discussion about it. I'm a social being and a social learner, and I think actually most teachers are, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Is there something that you do every day or most days that keeps you healthy and well?
I run every day. That's my addiction. I like to run for about an hour every day, and it's got nothing to do with physical fitness at all. It's just a matter of time to stop. Nobody can phone you. Nobody can. You're not. I like that little bubble of planning my next day on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And I always feel like I can think better when I'm done that. That's my addiction for sure. Yeah. And if I don't do it every day, I'm kind of an unbearable idiot. So yeah.
Do you have an organization or a person who really inspires you?
Absolutely, 100% yes. My mentor, fortunately, my personal mentor is also my sort of public icon, a guy named David Arnott. He is the chief commissioner of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission. He's a federal court judge. I taught his kids in high school, and now he was the treaty commissioner in Saskatchewan for 7 or 8 years. He is the man with the strongest relationship building skills I've ever met. Never have I ever seen anybody that has a negative word to say about him. Now he's in a position where he's running a human rights commission. And the work that he does in there, the brave work that he does in there, against a lot of demons, he calls them the cabal. That organization and that man, he's a great Canadian. And no questions asked. I think he's Martin Luther King, Saskatchewan style. He's just that brave and that bright.
Amazing. What's next for you? What are some of the things you're looking at tackling next? Projects you're working on? What can we see from John McGettigan in the near future?
Well, a nap would be good.
Maybe a run.
I honestly don't know. I think it's funny in this job. The political thing is an interesting piece. I've been approached by right, left, and center at a civic, provincial, and federal level to consider running for them. So, I think that's probably the thing I've done best is that nobody knows where I am politically. Yeah. That interests me. And I think we're in an era now politically where we need some sort of big tent politics. Yeah. And I think, I'll be honest with you, I think we need more teachers in every legislature, every parliament across the world. I'm not sure why there's so many damn lawyers. I don't get it. And it infuriates me that there's not enough teachers that step up. We're natural leaders, teachers are. And so I'm not saying that it interests me, that political part. But in that milieu, I would like to, either be directly involved or advising people that are directly involved. I got some young people on my executive. I have a 26-person executive that would be great MLAs. They'd be great MPs. They'd be great city councilors or mayors. And I would love to help them be that generation where we're filling legislatures and filling parliaments globally with teachers. Yeah, I think that would be my. If you wanted to ask me what my next dream job would be, it'd be something like that.
Amazing. I'm looking forward to it. Vote John McGettigan. Party to be named later.
Yeah. Big tent. Yeah.
So let's say people are really interested in following what you're doing, following some of the work around citizenship. How can they connect with you? You just talked about your Twitter. What's your Twitter handle? How can they contact you?
It's just my name. It's just at John McGettigan, and at Consentus is also at Consensus, is where we're trying to start a little bit of a small footprint of social media, and I think we're at a Medicare moment with that. I think that citizenship education is going to be the next social movement that comes out of Saskatchewan. I think the world's catching up on socialized healthcare, and I think that citizenship education is going to be something that's going to be tracked back to that stupid little city in Saskatchewan that started this ball roll. I think we need it. I think it's emergent. Yeah. And so, Consensus, or if you just Google citizenship education, you'll find us there too. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I want to thank you so much for speaking with me today, John.